Oh, why hello there. Hi, Ray McGuff here, famous author, poet, comedian, auteur of stage and screen. I'm going to bring you my first review of a book. One of our associates has written a book and asked for somebody's opinion on it. Submitted it to the channel months ago, and in much of our fashion here at ZTO TV, we all drug our feet with it, and I just recently finished it, so I guess I'll do the review. The book is entitled The Resurrection of Gideon. Bringing him back. Resurrecting him. By local author from Lima, Ohio, I believe, Carrie Meyer. I hope Frank, when he's putting this together, Franklin Tinkleton, our magic wizard, who is our editor-in-chief here, will be able to drop where you're able to buy this at. I wasn't too clear on it. I believe it's available online somewhere. I hope he can drop that in the deets, if you will, on the screen. But The Resurrection of Gideon by Carrie Meyer. Let's dive into it here. I'll give you a little brief synopsis that she wrote herself here. If I can get my stupid mouse to work. There we go. Vampire Gideon Gower was a monster, ruthless, bloodthirsty, and violent. A swift and brutal death awaiting anyone who crossed his path. He existed this way for centuries, until a shocking encounter in the 1930s left him reliving heartbreaking memories of loved ones long dead, touching on a pain he hadn't allowed himself to feel for over 370 years. Fast forward, 2018. 85 years have now passed, and Gideon hasn't preyed on a single human since that night. Instead, he chooses to feed off the animals of the Everglades and hides away in a small house in Miami. But the quiet of his self-imposed isolation is shattered by an unexpected appearance of Megan, a beautiful woman from his grisly past who's determined to return him to the fiend he once was. As Megan attempts to drag him back down into the bloody temptation, Gideon must decide. He must decide if he's a man or a raging beast. These two things are pulling him in different directions at once. Does he continue to fight his instincts, or does he allow that baser, darker part to once again take over? The latter is tremendously more appealing. Eventually, Gideon finds purpose in newly forged friendships and rediscovered family. But when a gruesome murder committed by Megan during Prohibition comes back to haunt their integrity 90 years later, it's threatening to expose not only Gideon, but Megan herself. The safety of his family as well. Gideon must do everything he can to protect them, even if this means unleashing the side he's been kept caged for 8.5 decades. The question is, can he close the door on that once it's been opened? Is Gideon willing to take that chance for them? But at what cost? What cost? And the name is spelled, it looks like Megan. Maybe I'm saying Megan wrong. I mean, it's Meegan. My head works weird, so when I'm reading things that I'm not familiar with, it just pushes it into the most familiar category. So if it's Megan, I guess that's the way we'll pronounce it. That's the way it looks like it. But I wanted to do it with Megan because that's how my brain was working. I was afraid I'd screw it up. Probably did. Regardless, this whole thing seems like it's going down now. It's a downslide. So far, off to a bad start. So right off the jump, people are going to say, Ray, what'd you think of this story? It's vampires. It's supernatural. It's right up my alley. I really liked it. My overall thoughts when reading it, this isn't really geared towards me, okay? As a specific reader, I've read so much fiction of vampire stuff over the years that it all seems to kind of blend together. For me, my favorite vampire story, next to Bram Stoker's Dracula, or Bram Stoker's Dracula, is Salem's Lot by Stephen King. Next to that is I Am Legend, which is basically a reverse vampire story. I Am Legends by Matheson. But So I'm kind of all phased out on vampire stuff. I've read so much of it that I'm like, over the years I'm kind of like, meh, I'm not as excited as I could have been at one period in my life. As a reader, though, I could appreciate what Carrie was doing here. She's taking old tropes and trying to weave them into today's society and posing some questions about morality. If you were a beast like this, how would you survive if you wanted to still live on a moral scale? Megan, so it's, Gideon is the main character who's grappling with that. Megan, I guess Megan, we'll just say Megan, is his link to the past, pulling him back towards that, visceral center that he enjoys. The thing I like about her story is that these people clearly enjoy being these beasts, but they are certainly aware of the morality around it. And some people have just given up in her stories and just allowed the beast to take over, and some people haven't. Some people have figured a way to walk the line, like a character we meet later in the story, William. He's kind of walking the line between beast and somebody who has still a clear morality. We meet a secret character named Katrina, who I won't spoil, who's also walking that line a little more so than the person that she's related to. And then we have Tony and Tracy, who end up being like our antagonists towards the end. The story starts off a little slow for me, if I'm being completely honest. But then Carrie does something very interesting here. She's not just going to stick with the normal tropes. She flashes back. I think for me, the most interesting parts of these stories are when she does these time flashbacks. And the first one we encounter, I believe, is a medieval knight. And I don't want to spoil too much of the story, but the story really hums along when she's writing the past parts of the story. I could give a fuck about the future parts. I mean, I'll be in all honesty. Like, sure, it ties the whole thing together, but if you gave me a medieval knight story with this guy, I would eat that shit up. I would read the hell out of it. It touches on so many different things too. There's a prohibition story in here that's tied into it that ties into the next book, I believe it's called Eternal Night, that she's working on. That I think if she builds a bulk of that world in the beginning of that story, that could be something pretty cool. We also get flashes of it, 1800s London. The story really sings when she's writing in those time periods because it's interesting. There's a lot going on. She clearly has a world built out in her thought processes on this, but she just needs to flesh it out a little bit more. Give me an entire 10-chapter story about the medieval knight part, and then drop me back into the world. That's what I'm saying here. Is this thing really connects when you have because that story is so. And if you read the book yourself, you'll see that story especially is very intricate to the later why this guy is the way he is, and it was awesome. As far as some of the things I didn't like, there are some very convenient avenues that she decided to take her characters down. I think that this, like I said, the character of Katrina is a very interesting character, but I believe she's just kind of appears in the story. I feel like there should have been more around her as a character before the reveal as to who she's tied to in this main story. To me, it was very just kind of like matter of fact, oh, here's this thing. And as a reader, you want to be surprised, which I was surprised, but I wanted to be surprised and I could have connected it if there was another avenue before that. So what I mean by that is maybe she could have introduced her earlier as a side character and then connected the dots. It just felt to me it dropped in. Also, the ending of this story, while a very tight ending, it's lacking, I feel, in a little climax because it's setting up the next book. and when a series does this, it always agitates me. When you're setting up a series, like, you got to look at like the scope. Like for me, the Dune series is very like Frank Herbert's Dune. Every single story in that series connects to each other, but every single story is self-contained in the vision that it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and the end is left with just a little sprinkling of some stuff that will lead you to the next story. I don't understand this perpetual non-ending that everybody wants to do. This story could have had a nice ending spot, and then maybe an epilogue that she tied in here too, to give you a little enticement as to what was next. Another book that did this to me was Clive Barker's Imagica. Imagica is a tremendous story together in its 2 parts, but it was released as a part 1 and part 2. And if you read part 1, it's almost infuriating because it clearly sets up for the part 2. I don't like that as a reader. So overall, people are like, Ray, what did you think? What were your thoughts on this? Very well written. Kept my attention. Like I said, there are some tropes in here that I didn't quite like, but there were some things that were well done and some stuff I'd love to see. I'd look, if Carrie's listening to this, and I imagine she will be, she seems to have partaken in a lot of our stuff. I imagine she'll want to listen to this review since it's her work, but if she's listening, I'd love a short story with this guy as the medieval knight in that world. That would be amazing. But overall, I would give this 7 out of 10. 7 out of 10 vampire bites, little vampy kisses on the neck, and maybe 3 on the neck and a couple on the stomach, and maybe like one of the nether regions. I don't know. How do you vampire get? How does your vampire get down? That's what I say when vampires approach me. How does your vampire get down? You know what I'm saying? Isn't that what kids say in the streets? But at any rate, you should seek this out. The Resurrection of Gideon. The Resurrection of Gideon. 7 out of 10. It's worth your time. Thank you very much for checking out ZTO TV. Stay tuned for all of our other content. Check us out, Podbean and Shudder. I think we're on Shudder, Frank. I don't know. We're on some stuff. Facebook us. All right, Google that shit. Thanks again. Stay tuned.